Good morning, good evening. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing, we wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you who are listening, we welcome you in. As usual, give a shout out to a couple sponsors to start the show. Our oldest and most consistent sponsor, at Affinity WES. That's at Affinity Writing and Editing Services. If you do anything with writing or editing, they're there to help. And I do strongly recommend them. Let them know the Silverlight Show sent you their way, and they'll help give you a little bit of a bit extra warm, extra friendly treatment by two wonderful ladies who know the English language inwards and outwards and are fantastic at their jobs. We also, once again, would like to talk about hippie witch vibes. That's all one word, hippie witch vibes. They sell their teas, essential oils, all sorts of quality craft products. Stardust, the witch's brew, is, in my opinion, one of the perfect things to listen to the Silverlight Show with and enjoy a cup of tea, because I'm a tea man. But they also have a lucid dream tea. For those of you who don't know what lucid dreaming is, that's the type of dreams where you remain in control. So, if you have nightmares and want to stop them, this is an opportunity to stop them. If you have dreams you really want to enjoy and you want to explore, this is the tea for you. And since it's tea, there's nothing harmful in it. All organic, freshly made, it's just wonderful tea. They also have some bracelets and crystals. I am completely neutral on the topic of crystals. I think they work, at the same token, not enough to recommend it. There's certain things in this world I believe work for some people and not for others. And that's just the way I think this is. For me it works, for you it might not. So I don't want to say, hey, get this, and then have you upset. So I will say, if it is your cup of tea, then by all means, give it a try. It's nice to be recording normal shows again. Nobody watching over my shoulder except for the censors at YouTube, who apparently let me do what I want. And, of course, you, the listeners, who are very much appreciated. This is a subject I've wanted to go down for quite some time, but once I step through the looking glass, I don't go through rabbit holes. On the other side of the looking glass, I found all sorts of things. Now remember, the world, especially when we're talking about conspiracies and the elite, is all about connections. Who knows who? Who worked with who found out what, and what are we not being told. Werner von Braun, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing it incorrect, I'm not a German speaker, not a little bit, aside from being able maybe to order a beer, but Werner von Braun is without question the number one, or possibly number two, most famous rocket scientist of the 20th century. The Russians might want to dispute that, and indeed the entire Eastern Bloc, but for now let's focus on Werner von Braun, because he was the one that enabled the Apollo moon program to proceed. It was his lobbying, his genius, his contribution to the world. That being said, accomplishments don't exist in a vacuum. And Werner von Braun left many cryptic things that should be examined. Werner von Braun was born into a baron's family. In a different situation, he would have been a baron. But after World War I, came to its conclusion and the German aristocracy was scattered to the four winds, he went out and got his PhD. Now, while he had his PhD in physics, he was still a brilliant engineer. A lot of physicists can describe anything you can imagine mathematically, but still have trouble opening the door to their cars. Nothing against them, they're very brilliant people. One thing we're going to be talking about this show a lot is brilliant people. I love reading about them, I love learning about them, and I always find it interesting how some make the jump to power, like Klaus Schwab. He went from straight academia to head of the IMF, and we're going to see that happening with somebody else here. Werner von Braun wasn't a rags to riches story. Now, he had difficult times, and he caused himself some difficult times. Let's imagine him as the way we're expected to picture him. A starry-eyed man with dreams of going to the moon, thinking he can work his way around it. He's portrayed as a typical genius. Like Einstein, a little bit scatterbrained, a little bit in his own world, yet capable of incredible feats of engineering. And while this is partially true, Einstein was not scatterbrained at all. Maybe in his later years, but for the most part, he wasn't. That famous photo of him sticking out his tongue, he hated it. He absolutely hated that photo, because he felt it took away from the seriousness of his work. Spur of the moment thing, he was just goofing around like anybody does. You're at the office, you see your coworker, you stick your tongue out. He was just being a regular guy. Yes, he was really smart. The same token, he wasn't this mysterious alien creature. He was just a regular guy. And Werner von Braun, despite the fact he was an aristocrat and a genius, still had a regular social life. He hung around with people who were like-minded, because believe me, it's very difficult to discuss a big topic with somebody who has no idea. For example, try explaining anything complicated to an 8-year-old. It's not the 8-year-old isn't smart, just the 8-year-old doesn't have the experience to learn about what happened. Again, nothing wrong. The kid's busy playing with Lego, with Barbie, with whatever else is important in their life. That's what 8-year-olds do. One second they want to learn about being a scientist. The next minute they want to have Grimlock the Dinobot attack Polly Pocket. Happened to a friend of mine. Werner von Braun. I think I'm going to shorten that name very shortly. Werner von Braun was the same way. He grew up, he went to school, and then he wound up working as an engineer. Because that's what he liked doing. Building, tinkering, making things better. He knew theoretically what he could do, but he wanted to make theory practical. He was inspired by Robert Goddard, who is a U.S. rocket engineer and physicist, and both of them had decided that rockets were the immediate future. Von Braun had other ideas like space stations, and even the space shuttle was kind of his brainchild. So up till the modern day, we still have the imprints of his fingernails, not his fingernails, the imprints of his fingerprints on everything that we do. Now, this is why it becomes concerning when you realize that his greatest achievements were working for the Nazi Germans. Here's where his life gets interesting. There's two schools of thoughts in many things in life. Did somebody know about something, or were they innocent? The problem we have with examining Nazi Germany is that we are dealing with a near-perfect police state. They had control over the information they gave out. They had control of where you went. They had control over who you socialized with. This is where it becomes very difficult to examine precisely what was going on with Wernher von Braun. Jim Marrs, that's Mars with two A's, wrote an interesting analysis of the situation where he said when Project Paperclip was going through the scientists, they came across the Nazi documents. And of course the Nazis wanted to make sure everybody was loyal to their cause. So they would make sure, okay, this man is an ardent Nazi. He is faithful to our cause, he believes in Germany, and he works for us. Supposedly, the United States, when they were going through those documents, and they came across the scientists they really wanted, they would just insert 3 letters. Not an ardent Nazi. And with just a simple addition of 3 words, you transform somebody entirely. Because after the war, some people knew that the war with Russia was coming. Operation Unthinkable had been proposed by Churchill, which was basically to defeated Germans, give them guns, give them tanks, give them planes, turn them right back around and send them after the Soviets. And the reason he had thought of this was because Stalin made no secret what he was going to do. At the Malta Conference, Churchill famously rose to give a toast and said, toast to our friend and comrade Stalin, who manifests a desire for peace. When the microphone was off, he said, a piece of Poland, a piece of Czechoslovakia, a piece of the Ukraine, and he went on like that. He knew the Soviets were going to be belligerents. Now, Churchill was getting on in years, but he knew this was a situation that was coming up. And indeed, in his second presidency in the 1950s, the Cold War was in full swing. So he was able to march into the office, ready to take over, because he knew it was coming. Von Braun, we know for sure that he visited Mittelwerk, which was the underground factory where the enslaved people, the Jews, the gypsies, homosexuals, anybody who was fit to work, were imprisoned, building his rockets, building all sorts of things. But they were definitely building his rockets. There's no question he at least visited twice. And it'd be pretty hard to camouflage the fact that you've got oppressed workers hanging about the place, doing various things. There's a big difference between citizens who are starving and prisoners who've been starving for years. And von Braun was no idiot. He was pretty smart. And he knew Hitler was not a good man. The same token, I can respect the fact that he was working for the paycheck, more or less, for the accomplishments in his case. But he had a person that was willing to sponsor his research, was willing to give him facilities, and make his dreams come true. As he himself joked, he aimed for the moon and occasionally hit London. That's right. There was a point he would joke about the London Blitz. So we can already see a crack in the facade of an innocent man. In later years, he became very apologetic and would correspond with survivors and tell them he was genuinely sorry. And perhaps that's an old man clearing his conscience. The fact is, for a long time, he didn't acknowledge them at all. In his defense, I will say, if you've gone through something horrible, and remember, he was arrested by the Nazi Gestapo and put on trial, but he managed to escape, whereas so many others didn't. Escape is a wrong word. They let him go eventually. And that's why he was around for the Americans to capture and bring over to the United States. Now, of course, in the United States, you've got this man who was born into nobility, raised as someone special, promoted into the Nazi ranks. And I do believe he was also in the Gestapo. You don't get to be Gestapo just by being somebody that agrees. I mean, that's like the difference between joining Neighborhood Watch and joining the KKK. They're two very different things. Neighborhood Watch, yes, they mean well. They might be a little over-enthusiastic at times, but the KKK, you know what you're getting into at that point. And no matter how we want to try to defend Von Braun for his achievements, fact is, he knew there were very unsettling things going on. And he chose to do nothing. You could argue he was powerless, but everybody can make a difference if they're willing to. He wasn't willing to. He buried his nose in his work. He chose to ignore the problem. Ignorance is not an excuse, as lawyers are so happy to point out. But by maintaining his supposed ignorance of the fact of the horrible conditions that were going on and the fact his designs, his research were being used not only to bomb London but to enslave people, it was a joke to him at first. Once he got into the United States, he began to see the military-industrial complex. And he became a part of it. For a long time, he was working with Fairchild, with Grumman, with all sorts of contractors, and most importantly, of course, he's most notably known for his work with NASA. One thing you might not know is that he also had learned English from regular GIs, American GIs, who of course would swear and use slang. So in the late 1940s, when Disney came to him and wanted to do a documentary on the future in space, well, they were obviously rather shocked at the documentary quality they got back. It had to be cut, reshot, all sorts of things, because while his accent wasn't bad, his American accent was bad, shall I call it that? Can you imagine being the fella at Disney who's answering to Walt Disney himself? You get the tape back, ready to listen to this brilliant man talk, and you get an American soldier's language coming out. Yeah. And we all know Disney, well, they're connected to everything. And they have the ultimate high ground. Even when they have bad years, they're doing better than most of the other companies around them in the entertainment world. But Disney will wait for another time. Let's look at NASA, everybody's favorite target. Because NASA, I'll say this again, NASA is a military organization. Their charter says they're subordinate to the United States military. Now, with Space Command out there, it's kind of interesting to see there's no struggle for power. You know why there's no struggle for power? Because the United States Space Force is number one. There's no question. They send their officers to NASA so that they can take up a rocket for a joyride, swoop around the International Space Station, come back down, whatever missions they choose to do, it's still under military command. One thing the Germans were always good with was a military command system. And von Braun was very comfortable in that military environment where there's captains and colonels. He's right at home in that environment. That's probably why he flourished. The authoritarian Nazis were replaced by an authoritarian military in his life. So, business as usual, just difference it being they're not slave laborers producing his rockets, there's independent companies. And indeed, there's a memo, I believe from Boeing, but I'd have to look it up, that's complaining that von Braun and the other former Germans, that uses a little more harsh language, are trying to build the rocket themselves without using private industry. Of course, in the United States, the government building anything on its own is socialist. And especially during the 1950s, that would be highly suspicious. But instead of being investigated by Joseph McCarthy or any of the other anti-red people out there, von Braun wasn't even given a slap on the wrist. The Nazis let him go, the Americans let him go, and here's this eccentric little genius playing with his rockets. The thing you have to remember about a manned space program that is subordinate to the military is that it is working for military goals. They weren't just sitting around and shooting rockets at the moon. They were trying to build bigger rockets, because if you have a bigger rocket, you can put either a bigger nuke on it, or you can put lots of smaller nukes on them. While the Saturn V would have been very impractical as a nuclear delivery system, it was just to show the Soviet Union that since the United States could lift that much payload into orbit, that means they could not only put a space station up and drop bombs on them, but they could just leave the bombs in orbit waiting to deorbit. That's still a concept that's going on to this day. The Russians have been talking about it, the Chinese have been talking about it, and it's only the treaties that have stopped people from doing it, because it's, quite frankly, a brilliant idea. Nobody can detect the launch and react to it if you just drop it out of the sky. Or keep it in orbit and detonate it and use the electromagnetic pulse to disable an area. Unfortunately, my opinion of any treaties when it comes to weapons is that they are wholly ineffective. South Africa was never supposed to have nuclear bombs. But surprise, in 1991, they did. A lot of them. Israel has never officially admitted to having them, although it's an open secret that they do. North Korea and Iran doubtless have a couple nuclear bombs. They're probably not very sophisticated, but they'll do the job. For Iran, well, strategically speaking, it would only take a couple nukes to seal the Straits of Hormuz and make sure no American warships could get in there. The American strategy is based on sending a couple carrier groups into the Straits of Hormuz and being able to have mobile bases to take the Iranians out. So they need a couple bombs. They don't even need to be deliverable by an airplane, rocket, or anything. You just roll them into place, let them do their job. North Korea has a missile program. They are able, theoretically, to deliver whatever bombs that they have, probably not much more advanced than what we know the Fat Man and Little Boy bombs were. But you don't need to have super advanced bombs. You just need to have them. India developed atomic weapons in the 1970s and then put everything away and said, nope, we've proven we can do this, now we're going to use our weaponry for peace. Pakistan developed a nuclear bomb and tested it, and it worked. Mysteriously, India was able to just reach into its back pocket and say, oh yeah, we've got nukes too. Really? A nuclear bomb even if you know precisely what you are doing and you're a genius and a good engineer and you have Von Braun's expertise with Einstein's brilliance and Elon Musk's pockets, you're not going to be able to produce a nuclear bomb right away. You have to build a breeding reactor. You have to build, a facility to manufacture the bomb itself. You have to build a rocket or a plane or something to carry it over. It would take at least, if you did 100% effort that you could, it takes at least a year to get things up and running. But not the Indians. They got them up and running right away. That means they had them. They were just keeping them where nobody would see them. And this is why the justification for going to war in these various countries because they're hiding weapons of mass destruction is laughable. When the Soviet Union fell, it was rumored that nuclear weapons were being bought and sold. Now, it's quite possible they were. The former Soviets invited the United States in and asked them to help them go and investigate and hunt down leads. But the fact is, records are easy to manipulate. And for a couple soldiers who have been going without pay, having somebody give you a lot of money just to be distracted while they do something, it's a very efficient way to do things. So when I hear people say that treaties will prevent these weapons and stuff from being used, I automatically tune it out. And it's also why I tune it out when people say, oh, look, this is the technology that we have that's being used. No. The military will always keep one thing as a surprise. The F-117 was kept as a surprise for 10 years. And we don't even know what they're keeping as a surprise right now, but it sure heck isn't the F-22 or the F-35. They've hinted there's another fighter that they've got designed, but they're not telling us the truth. Whatever that one they have designed and they built within a year is either a really good test market or they've already got the one after it that's being produced and built and tested and run. Because while it's true, for a weapon to be effective, it has to scare your enemies. This is true. Because pretend we're neighbors. If you know I have a gun and I know you have a gun, neither one of us is going to be tempted to start trouble with the other because we both have guns. Whereas if you have a gun and I don't, I have two choices. Do I buy a gun and tell you so I know I can trust you? Or do I not say anything, hoping you'll try something so that I can take you by surprise? They're both valid tactics, and they've both equally been used. But never think a treaty will stop anybody from doing what they want, especially nations like the United States and Russia that have huge amounts of territory that they can tell people, stay out of here. Von Braun had open access to those territories. He was able to go to Area 51. He was able to go to Edwards Air Force Base, the legendary Hangar 18. The man was one smart son of a bitch, and he knew how much information he had. That's why, with other former Nazi scientists that were brought over during Project Paperclip, they just kind of stopped paying attention to them after a while. They figured they had been shown how much better American life was because they could now buy brand new cars, they could buy fancy houses, which are all rationed and, at a premium in wartime Germany. They were basically hoping that just the incentive of being able to do what they wanted was enough to make them change their minds about a lot of things. Which was true for a lot of them. I mean, coming from a restricted area and suddenly being able to go and drink when you want, gamble when you want, smoke when you want, all those kinds of things, that is definitely freedom. We know von Braun liked to smoke and Hitler hated smokers, so he definitely enjoyed that freedom. But von Braun, once again, is the center of our discussion when we talk about space. Now, towards the end of his life, I don't know if I'm going to say the end of his life, but he became involved, not romantically, with Dr. Carol Rosen. Dr. Carol Rosen was born on March 29th, 1944, which means she was a baby, just a baby, while Von Braun was raining rockets down on London. She was his ambassador for a couple of years, which means a glorified secretary. He didn't want to call her a secretary because this woman graduated from the University of Delaware. She has PhD. She has so many accolades that, well, maybe it's best if I list them. One of the things, she was the first female executive of an aerospace company. Specifically, she was a corporate manager of Fairchild Industries. For those of you wondering, Fairchild was an American aircraft manufacturer that was around during the First World War, the Second World War. Indeed, they're still around to a certain degree today. But here's where we start making our connections. Fairchild, in 1996, took over Dornier. Yes, Dornier. The producers of bombers for Nazi Germany in World War II. Curious. The man selected for his assistant a woman who was the first executive for the partner that also built weapons for Germany in World War II. So while von Braun was building the rockets, Dornier was building the airplanes. Curious, isn't it? She also is the founder of the Institute for Security and Cooperation in Outer Space. She works as a speaker, author, educator, child psychologist, futurist, and military strategist. That's a heck of a resume there. I mean, speaker, author, educator, they all do kind of go hand in hand. The second you're going to be a speaker, you're an author because you write your books, you plug them, that's the way you make your money. Futurist, a lot of scientists are futurists. Not all, but a lot of them are, because that's the way you make your living, is knowing what's going to happen in the future. And everybody has a different opinion. Military strategist, well, I'm still trying to find out exactly what she is doing as far as military strategy goes. Because her Institute for Security and Cooperation in Outer Space allowed her to oppose the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars, and using anti-satellite weapons. So for somebody who is determined to be an educator, whether it's for adults or for children, child psychologist, and who supposedly is working for the idea of peace, being a military strategist really stands out there, especially when juxtaposed with child psychologists. I respect my old sergeants very much. They were very, very good people. They knew their job. I wouldn't ask them about child psychology. Yes, they were parents. The same token, I'm not going to the sergeant first. I'm going to go to my mother, to my friends, to people I know a little bit better. So it's quite a tightrope that Carol Rosen was on. And keep in mind, while she's doing this, she's still the ambassador for von Braun. This three had a conversation towards the end of his life, and Von Braun made a very interesting series of predictions. That's right. The man was always ahead of his time. First of all, he said we wouldn't see Mars until 2050. Well, he's closer than a lot of people of his time thought, because a lot of them thought they'd be there within 10, 20 years. Nah, Von Braun was right saying it was a lot further ahead. And Elon Musk or the United States space program, they're realistically looking into the 2040s and 2050s by the time they do it. So he's not far off. How far off he is, we'll just have to stick around for a couple of years and find out. He also predicted the Cold War would end and terrorism would become the biggest threat. Lo and behold, he was right. After September 11th in 2001, his prediction became 100% true, and Carol Rosen had written it down long before. Now, Von Braun left us with one final prediction that he told to Carol Rosen, and that was, after terrorism calms down, there would be a false alien invasion, and this would be used to control the whole population. I remind you, this is a man that seems to know things. He's been around. He's been shown the secret underground caves, the places where the poor people are desperately assembling missiles. He's been to the secret areas in the United States that only exist in whispers. He's been involved in the military-industrial complex of not one, but two superpowers. Because Germany during World War II was absolutely a superpower, and the United States afterward, well, it still is a superpower. He was one of the people that could walk into a president's office, interrupt them and say, "I need to talk to you," and not be intercepted by anybody. That's how much power this former baron had. And not just in one country, but in two. Fascinating. And especially fascinating considering since Carol Rosen wound up working for Fairchild, working on the space program and on weapon systems, yeah, she is a very interesting link. And for her to insist that he made up this alien invasion prophecy, whether he did or he didn't, and I'm inclined to believe that he did. Smart men like to make predictions, and Carol Rosen is a futurist. She likes that kind of thing, predictions for the future. So, what is the alien invasion? Had you asked me in 2019, I would have referred you to a couple of very interesting leads that all say there'd be some sort of holographic technology being tested. That we would see Independence Day style aliens coming down, blowing stuff up, etc., etc. I'd also tell you I don't particularly think that this was going to happen. Now, I'm not so sure. Realizing that Von Braun was a brilliant man, and brilliant people don't always tell you directly what they mean. A virus is pretty alien. And indeed, the current pandemic that we're looking at is from a virus that is alien to us. That's why it's so effective at transmitting. In itself, it is not a very potent. It's not very potent at transmitting itself. But since our bodies do not have the defenses, we're especially susceptible to it. The flu we've had for millions of years. But this current pandemic, it's entirely something different. It is alien to us, foreign. But now that we're in the year 2021, I'm thinking this is just something he didn't foresee, and he did mean word for word what he meant. The alien invasion is next. For a long time now, TV shows, films, you name it, have all been depicting aliens coming to Earth. Anything from the two aliens on The Simpsons, I'm sorry I don't watch the show, but I know they exist, right down to Roger on American Dad. For 20 years, aliens, helpful or not, have been featured on television. If you want to go back further, look at Star Trek. In the 1960s, they were showing aliens that were helpful, harmful, whatever it might be, had all the emotional resonance of human beings and all the complicated motivations and schemes that human beings do. This is in 1969, when Von Braun is actively at work on the moon program. He knew Star Wars was coming. He knew Battlestar Galactica was coming. He knew Babylon 5 was coming. Firefly. All these things were coming. He didn't know the shows, nor did he know the shows' names. He just knew they were coming because we were being primed. The idea is for us to be able to consider people from outer space. I think it was Alien Nation, where the aliens come and live among us. All Von Braun said is that there would be a false flag alien invasion. He didn't specify what happened from there. And this is what makes it complicated. He's no longer with us to tell us what he meant. And even if he was, sometimes he says something and later on you regret it, so maybe he didn't mean to say that at all. The fact is, he was thinking it. And he was right. We are looking at an alien invasion of our bodies right now. Check out the news on space, on anything you want, and right now, well, for the last several years, since about 2010, it's gone from, there's a few planets out there, to say we know how many planets around the 1,000 nearest star systems. And we're still discovering more. Just this week, they announced that Proxima Centauri has an Earth-like planet in it, in that system. And that it probably harbors life. It is the closest star to, the third closest star. There's Proxima Centauri A, Proxima Centauri B, and C. It's only about 4.5 light years away. Now, light is 186 million miles per year, so it's quite a long distance to get there, and just a little bit out of our current technology. I mean, we could probably put together a probe and send it there and get information back within the next half century. But that doesn't do any good to people like you or I, unless Robert Bigelow comes through with his afterlife project and shows that we have a reason to be hopeful to be around for another couple hundred years, couple thousand years in non-corporeal form. Just as a shout back to last week's show. But we're being told now over and over that we're on the verge of discovering life, that Earth-like worlds are everywhere. We're not seeing radio signals from them, but I've always held, I don't think radio signals are the future. They're barely in the present. Yes, our cell phones are communicating quite a bit, but our cell phones don't actually use a lot of power. They transmit to the nearest tower, which doesn't need as much energy as you would need to transmit to a satellite. The tower is what communicates with the satellite. So that's why your cell phone can still go out of range if you decide to walk too far into a national park. Our technology is still very much ground dependent. It's going to become even more so. Radio waves are susceptible to all the problems of the world. Interference, we've all had that one staticky phone call. Well, that's because the signal itself is staticky. That can happen on a landline, that can happen on a cell phone, that can happen on a radio, even a military-grade radio. And trust me, it's happened to me. So I don't think radio signals last very long. First, they're slow. It takes 7 minutes to communicate with anything or anyone on Mars. So imagine for a second, you're on Mars. You want to use Google to find out the score of the Super Bowl. It's going to take you 14 minutes to find that out. 7 minutes for your signal to transfer to Google, half a second for Google to figure out what it is, and 7 minutes for it to transmit back. Imagine that. 14 minutes for an instant response. But these are the size distances that we're talking about. So when we're talking 4.2 light years to the nearest star, even if we were running at light speed, it's still 4.5 years away. Any alien that wanted to take us over would have to be much more advanced than we are. Again, kind of like Independence Day, except without the ability to write a virus in Windows 95 and take down an alien spacecraft. No, it also doesn't make sense that aliens would wait until now to invade us. Understandably, okay, let's place an advanced alien civilization right next door, at least one that can detect us. Maybe they leave an outpost there or a colony. And it detects us, the I Love Lucy show, back in the 1950s. So that would mean, and since the 1960s, they were aware of us, if not before. That's 60 years ago. If they had hostile intentions and were anywhere close by, they'd be here. And that's assuming that they could travel at light speed. If they could travel faster than light, that means that our signals have gotten even further. About 60 to 100 light years, depending on how far back things can go. Light goes out forever. It decays, the inverse square law, so basically for every bit it transfers forward, it loses roughly about 3/4 of its energy. The chart's in my head. I just can't figure out how to explain it at the moment. But because of that, when I hear him predicting a false flag alien invasion, I think it's possible, especially the false flag part. My only question is, what would the motivation be? Said this before. I severely doubt we have a captured alien spacecraft that we got from Roswell. Because while Obama was good at keeping everything to himself, nothing would have pleased Donald Trump more than to be the disclosure president. The one who told us, yes, aliens exist, they're here, they're not here, they're doing whatever. He would have loved that. Donald Trump is a bit of a maverick. Yet whatever they did to him, whatever they told him, he kept his mouth shut. At the same token, he let slip that advanced fighter jets were being used in Syria, in Libya, all over the place, and that they've even been in Europe. Was it just a crazy tweet where he mixed some numbers up? Or was that him forgetting his security clearance for a second? I think the latter. It's strange how we've gone from the F-22 to the F-35. That's a lot of F numbers to skip. We went from the B-1, the B-2 to the B-21. What happened to the B-3? I think it's a nice number, B-3. that shows that they're doing a lot of development behind the scenes. And like I said earlier, they're hiding it. But Von Braun knew. For all his faults, and I'm not calling him an innocent man or a good man, but I'm not going to call him an evil man either. He knew what he could do, and after a lifetime of existing as part of the military industrial establishment, he knew what he could get away with and what he couldn't. And that is why he confided in just one person, Carol Rosin. He probably didn't know she was going to write it in a book, or maybe he did. And as a clever man, like he was, he only mentioned it to one person and not to anybody else. Because if I was going to let a secret out, probably only tell one person, close friend, someone I can trust. And that way, even if they say something, everybody will say, nah, Silverlight's not like that. He would never do anything like that. Good news, I don't have a secret like that I'm aware of. But Carol Rosin, the executive director of the Peace Emergency Action Coalition for Earth, the founder of the Institute for Security and Cooperation Out of Space, the first female executive in an aerospace company, PhD, science and missile defense consultant, military strategist, and child psychologist. He told her, on purpose, he knew it would get out. And believe me, Carol Rosin wrote a book, UFO, The Greatest Story Ever Denied, Moon Rising. It's a video documentary, and it stars herself. But the title tells you exactly what you need to know. UFO, The Greatest Story Ever Denied. Because that's what's happening. Like I said, it was last week or the week before. By moving the files to the space agency, the CIA and the FBI can say, we don't have any files other than these, and get away with it truthfully. By telling Carol Rosin, she can say that story truthfully. But the truth is never what it seems. NASA, the military-controlled civilian organization, always stands for NASA, never a straight answer. They have an agenda. That agenda is to remind you, oh, alien life exists. Oh, the new lander going to Mars might find life. Oh, the new one might find life. And you notice every couple of years that the new lander is going to find life, and then the last one got there, they found what appeared to be a river, and they wouldn't send it anywhere near there. Never a straight answer. And who is the man behind it all? Wernher von Braun, former Nazi, whose life, from being a baron, in a baron's family, to working in the military, to working for the United States, was all about secrets, control, and secrecy. Like I said, the man was brilliant. No one can deny his accomplishments are exceptional. At the same token, it's important to remember of all the bodies he stepped on to get there. Maybe he felt guilt. I grant him that. Perhaps he was in shock. He just kept his head down and tried to get his work done, and then at the end of the day realized, I've done something horrible. I'm willing to try to see him in a positive light. But the fact remains, no matter how he tried to bury it in his own mind, it still happened. And I'm sorry he doesn't bring anybody back to life. Thank you for listening to the Silverlight Show. If you enjoyed this show, leaving a like, subscribing, anything helps the channel. As always, we will leave a link to the books that we publish on Amazon, because Everything you do there helps support the show. I don't like begging. I don't want to be one of these people that says, please come out on Patreon. I do know a lot of people are listening to my shows and not subscribing. This is a consistent thing on my Google or on my YouTube analytics. So if you do enjoy, show a little bit of love. Hit the subscribe button. A like just to say hi. It doesn't change anything in my world. I'm not getting paid. I probably never will be getting paid on these videos. And if you can, you know somebody who's like-minded, share. This information is free. And as long as I can, it always will be free. With that, I would just like to bid you adieu. Thank you all, and I hope you all have a good day.